So there's the picture of the Assyrian Empire, just as a reminder. Assyria, Ashur, is right there. The capital of Assyria for a while. Nineveh was the main capital. You remember Jonah going to Nineveh, how big that city was? And that's the extent of the Assyrian Empire. I want you to take a picture of that because you're going to see it again. Remember, Egypt was the first real enemy of Israel, but they didn't really come and subjugate Jerusalem. They didn't really come and take them captive and all that stuff. They made them pay taxes, and then they aligned with them, and Israel would go back and forth with the frenemies of Egypt. And remember, Egypt is a picture of the world. You don't go down there for help. You don't rely on them. But the Assyrians were the first empire to overtake Israel, then overtake Judah, surround Judah and Jerusalem. Remember, then the Babylonians came, and that's a picture of the spiritual kingdom. I think this is a picture of the Antichrist kingdom, and we're going to see that tonight. I think the Babylonian kingdom is a picture of the dragon beast kingdom. The mystery Babylon is a very spiritual concept to it. And if you have those ideas, if you don't want to flesh them out, fine. But at least you know that when you hear about Assyria and Babylon and those things, you know the kind of things that are happening. You remember Daniel's statue, and we'll keep that in mind as we go a little bit. Just a reminder, Micah 5, when the Assyrian comes into our land and treads in our palaces. So when that happens, Jesus Christ is going to meet him. Just read Micah 5 again. It's what I like to call the completion of the Christmas story, little town of Bethlehem. And so Jesus will come at that time. They're going to tread in the palaces of Israel. But the Lord says, muster your troops, O daughter of troops, O daughter of Jerusalem, Israel's troops, muster your troops. And I'm making a case that there is significant evidence that there is going to be some real battles to come at the end of the tribulation, and that will bring in the millennium. So the Assyrian. Let's talk about the Assyrian. And this is one of the titles of the Antichrist. We already saw that Jesus Christ is going to meet him and kill this man. He's a man. He's the Antichrist. Remember, the beast is the picture of the Antichrist. The dragon in Revelation is a picture of Satan. Okay? And so, Revelation 13, and I saw a beast rising out of the sea. There's a man coming out of the sea of people with 10 horns and 7 heads, with 10 diadems on its horns and blasphemous names on its head. And the beast that I saw was like a leopard, its feet was like a bear's, and its mouth was like a lion's mouth. So you remember, if you've ever read or even heard of Daniel, you've been taught in Daniel, you remember the 10 horns, you remember these beasts that come out of chapters 7 and 8, which we're going to touch on here. But Revelation reveals this man is going to come out of these beasts out of the sea. He's going to be with 10 horns and 7 heads. And in other words, there's going to be 7 kings or leaders, but there's going to be 3 nations, because there's 10. There's going to be 7 heads, heads. But see, the Antichrist is going to be given rulership over 3 of them. He's going to subdue 3 kings. That's why the difference between the 7 and 10. So there's 10 nations, but the Antichrist is going to have direct control over 3 of them. And the beast that I saw was like a leopard, its feet like a bear, and a mouth like a lion. Where have we seen that before? Chapter 7 of Daniel. A lion, a bear, and a leopard. So we know for a fact that if you go back to Daniel 7, which we're just going to touch on, if you go back to Daniel 7, now, and remember, Daniel says, seal these things up until the end. And the wise will understand, and God's going to unveil this stuff. So John, at the end, remember, when Christ died and raised from the dead, the beginning of the end started. Hebrews says these are the last days. In other places, these are the last days. In these last days. And so John, in Revelation, is talking about what Daniel was saying in chapter 7, in that particular case. And so there's three nations, a lion, a bear, and a leopard, but Revelation says that he saw these same three, a lion, a bear, and a leopard. So there it is in 7:4 of Daniel, but in verse 7, Daniel sees a fourth beast, more terrifying and dreadful and exceedingly strong. It had great iron teeth that devoured, broken in pieces, and stamped what was left with its feet. So this fourth beast, whoever it is, and we'll get to that in a minute, but whoever that fourth beast is, he just trampled everything else. Whatever the Greeks did, whatever the Medo-Persians did, whatever the Assyrians did, this fourth beast just crushed all of what they did. So they had to be a more powerful kingdom in that sense. But remember, one is made of gold, one is made of silver, one is made of bronze, and this one has 2 legs and its feet are clay. So it's strong, iron teeth, but it's brittle as well. And we could talk about that. We won't get really into that too much right now. So Daniel says, I considered the horns, these 10 horns come out of this it devoured broken pieces and stamped what was left with his feet. It was different from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. The fourth beast had 10 horns. Okay? Now when you jump over to Revelation, those 10 horns are to come. You see? So Daniel is seeing what John saw. He's seeing the 10 horns. All right? And some are going to make the case that was Rome. And then out of Rome, Rome's going to rise up again. And Rome is going to be a part of or have 10 kings. Okay? Now, we're going to talk about that here in just a few minutes. Daniel says, I considered the horns, and behold, there came up among them a little horn, before which 3 of the first horns were plucked up by the roots. That's what Revelation again is saying. And behold, in this horn were eyes like eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking great things. Then I desired to know the truth about the fourth beast, and it seemed greater than its companions. As I looked, this horn made war with the saints, and prevailed over them, until the Ancient of Days came, and judgment was given for the saints of the Most High, and the time came when the saints possessed the kingdom. In Daniel chapter 7, the picture of these 4 beasts takes us right to the end, when Jesus Christ, having been given authority by the Father, will come and kill this 4th beast. Okay? That's what's going on here. And he's going to have dominion over the saints for a while. We believe that he's going to have dominion over the saints that are in the tribulation. We don't believe the church. We believe the church is separate and will be gone by then. Some want to say that that the church will actually go through part of this, that we will actually be given over to them for a time. I'm only going to say this. I believe in the pre-trib rapture. However, how much of a tribulation will we get in our own lives? How much will we see, and reminding ourselves what is happening in China and in Egypt and others? People are dying right now by the hands of ISIS and Boko Haram and others in Africa. And so we have to be careful that we are ready to go through anything. And so, like Sonia and I were talking about something the other day, and we just mentioned that we should hope for the short run, but plan for the long. So plan for the longest run and to be courageous, okay? So, the picture in chapter 7 is, it's clear as a bell that the Ancient of Days comes and kills the Antichrist. Okay, that's clear in chapter 7. If you have your Bibles, Chapter 7, down there, write, clear picture of the Antichrist, if you want to, or something to that effect. However, in chapter 8, it's very interesting because, I mean, ever since I've been in the church and what I've learned, and from very good people sticking to their guns, and I like hearing people who say, you know, I've come to learn something else, or I've kind of evolved in my thinking about the Bible, you know, some of those kinds of things I think are helpful. But in general, I will just say this, you know, really good people, Dr. Jeremiah, Dr. MacArthur, John MacArthur, you know, all the good ones, all the really, really, really good ones are gonna disagree with me tonight. Because this is what they've taught, this is what they're in their books. I've got Jeremiah's study Bible here, this is what's there. But I'm gonna run against them a little bit tonight. And I'm gonna show you why, okay? Daniel 8. Daniel 7, a picture of the beast. Out of the 10 horns comes the Antichrist. Chapter 8, we have a picture of the ram and the goat. And we've been through that, remember? We talked about the 4 people, the 4 commanders who came out of Greece's empire. Ready? Remember? And Seleucus was the picture of the one who owned basically through Turkey and through Iran and to the Pakistani border. And we're going to talk a little bit about that again. But just remember, there's the ram and the goat. And so they're different beasts, but kind of a same picture. And so let's play this out a little bit again. And I know we've been through this a little bit, but I want to contrast these. Verse 9 out of 8. Out of one of them came a little horn, which grew exceedingly great toward the south, toward the east, and toward the glorious land. Now, this is important, because this is where, I mean, right off the bat, there's a problem here with many of the good scholars, okay? Whoever this little horn is, this is the picture of the little horn coming out of Greece, the Seleucus kingdom. And he became great, this little horn, not his dad, not anybody else, not one of the other horns, the little horn, which we know in chapter 7 was the Antichrist. But people are going to want to say here, well, this is a type of the Antichrist. This is a type. This is Antiochus Epiphanes. And it is, and it's more. Okay? So out of this came a little horn which grew, and this little horn grew exceedingly great toward the south, and toward the east, and toward the beautiful land, or the glorious land. It grew great, even toward the host of heaven. And some of the host and some of the stars it threw down to ground and trampled on them. Now right there, when they're talking about Antiochus Epiphanes, I understand what they're talking about a little bit. The stars were some of the religious Jews, the good people who fought against them, and the good priests and stuff. I understand that, and I agree with that. But right here, there's some very spiritual things happening, and a very change in what is happening. In fact, this power that this man has it to the host of heaven. He has it to the host of heaven. Now, you're reminded, Antiochus Epiphanes, he called himself that. Epiphanes, it means exalted one, and, you know, he thought he was all that, and then some. He thought he was God incarnate. We know he wasn't. Verse 11, it became great even as the great of the prince of hosts. So people are saying Antiochus Epiphanes became great as the prince of hosts. And they say that because he took over the temple and he killed some people and he decimated the burnt offerings. And I don't think that's enough. I just don't. And there's more here to suggest that there's more here to suggest that this is another picture of what was happening in Daniel's day. It's a picture of what Gary is saying often, that there's a nearer, it's actually pretty far out for them. It's a near prophecy, but then far further still. Or a far prophecy and further still. There's a lot going on here to suggest that this is Antiochus, but it is also the Antichrist. It became great even as the prince of hosts. And the regular burnt offering, notice this now, The regular burnt offering was taken away from him. Who? The Prince of Hosts. And the place of his sanctuary was overthrown. And that happened. Antiochus Epiphanes, and you'll see some of the history of what exactly happened. And a host will be given, in other words, many will be given to him over it, together with the burnt offerings. Because of transgression, it will throw truth to the ground, and it will act and prosper. And Antiochus did that. Then I heard a holy one speaking, and another holy one said to the one who spoke, "For how long is the vision concerning the regular burnt offering?" So now watch this, okay? There's a beginning of the burnt offering. The regular burnt offering was given to them to start sacrifice. So watch the progression here, because this is important. The Jews will be given a regular burnt offering. They're going to be able to do this for a while. Then there's going to be the transgression that makes desolate. That's the abomination of desolation talked about in Daniel, and talked about in Revelation, and that Jesus talked about in Matthew, okay? And he said to me, for 2,300 evenings and mornings. This is really interesting. Now, where else in the Bible do we have specific days given? There's going to be something happening coming in the future, and it's going to be for specific days. Well, it's in the book of Daniel. The 70 weeks, the 69 weeks, and then the interval when the Messiah is cut off, and then the last week. Remember, a week means 7 years in the biblical prophetic language, in the Hebrew language. And so for 69 weeks, 69 times 7, 490, if I remember right? 483, thanks. And then the Messiah is going to get cut off. So there was 483, Messiah dies on the very day. And we can go through the calculations at some other point. Okay? And then there's a gap period, the parentheses, and that's what you and I are in. Jesus died, he raised from the dead. The Gentiles are being grafted in right now. The Israelites have been set aside. Paul specifically says that. The Israelites have been set aside, but there's one more week for them, not for us, for them. You see the dispensational work of God? They were supposed to be light to the nations. They failed, but he didn't give up on them because he gave a promise to Abraham. Set them aside. Let's go out and do what they were supposed to do. Bring in the church, bring in the Gentiles. That's what we talked about this morning, by the way. We talked about Saul and Paul. And then the church, I believe, is done. And then the Lord said, now it's the time for Jacob's trouble. Specific language in the Bible. 2,300 evenings and mornings. Now, I'm going to go back and say, where is this Boko Erev? Who was with us on Tuesdays when we were going through Genesis? Boko Erev. Evenings and mornings. Genesis 1. Evenings and mornings. It's a picture of creation. It's a picture of God's work. And so he's going to give them 2,300 evenings and mornings. By the way, that's the Jewish day. That's how they do their days. And so then the sanctuary shall be restored to its rightful place. Just for your information, 2,300 evenings and mornings is 6.3 years. 6.3 years. I don't know if you've ever heard of any teaching about 6.3 years. I really honestly have not. Too much. Lord, who cares? But I think it's helpful. If we're paying attention, it is helpful. And I also want to say this, that this is found in Daniel, and when you try to figure this stuff out, the first place to look is Daniel. And then you can go elsewhere. Other places are helpful. But this 2,300 mornings, evenings and mornings, these 2,300 days fit somewhere. They mean something. Now watch what happens. Then the sanctuary will be restored to its rightful place. When I, Daniel, had seen the vision, I sought to understand it. He said, behold, I will make known to you what shall be at the latter end of the indignation, for it refers to the appointed time of the end. And remember, we talked about this, that can't be before Christ. Some people say this is Antiochus Epiphanes at 165 or 150 BC. But the end days, number one, starts after Christ's resurrection from the dead. And these are for the latter times. And this angel is going to say it, I think, 4 times. So I'm not sure. I am sure, actually. I am sure. I am sure that the main emphasis here for many people is that this is a complete picture of Antiochus Epiphanes, that this happened. And the reason they say that is because the Antichrist must come out of Rome for them. Now that may be true, okay? But because it comes out of Rome and Antiochus does not come out of Rome, they have to reconcile Antiochus and the 2300 days and the Roman Empire. Now I know that's a little confusing, but we're going to get to this, okay? Because the 4th beast is the beast of the kingdom of the Antichrist. It is the beast kingdom of the Antichrist. And the question is, the big question to prophecy experts and buffs and who look into this stuff is, and really honestly one of the big issues is, beside the rapture, the timing of the rapture and is it coming, is where does the Antichrist come from? Now, again, we can say, well, we're not looking for the Antichrist, we're looking for Jesus Christ. And that's true. But first of all, this was given to us to understand. And second of all, there's a couple things in here that if we're watching, it's very, very helpful and interesting for us. As for the ram that you saw with the 2 horns, these are the kings of Medo-Persia. Very clear about this. And the goat is the king of Greece. And the great horn between his eyes is the first king. As for the horn that was broken in the place which 4 others arose, 4 kingdoms shall arise from his nation, but not with his power. Now, we've been through this. This is Alexander the Great. And these are his 4 generals. That is really clear because that's exactly what happened. Okay? However, that can't be all that it means. That's what happened, but that's not all it means. And I'll show you this. At the latter end of their kingdom, and my question is, where's that at? What does that mean? Watch, and we'll talk about that as we go. When the transgressors have reached their limit, a king of bold face, one who understands riddles, shall arise. Now, people will say, this is Antiochus. Right here, this is Antiochus Epiphanes. He understands riddles, he shall arise. His power shall be great, but not by his own power. And he shall cause fearful destruction, and shall succeed in what he does, and destroy mighty men and the people who are the saints. Now, again, I will suggest somewhere in here, this is definitely Antiochus Epiphanes right here, and Alexander and his generals, but something changes here. And I believe actually it changes up here. It changes up here because that's for future. But then he morphs back into talking about the ram and the goat and the generals that come out of that. And now what I'm suggesting is we really are not certain where the end of these kingdoms are. Just like who the 4th beast is. Again, we'll get into more of this. I'll show you a map. When a king of bold face, one who understands riddles, shall arise, his power shall be great, but not by his own power. That's satanic. And he shall cause fearful destruction, and shall succeed in what he does, and destroy mighty men and the people who are the saints. By his cunning he shall make deceit prosper under his hand, and in his own mind he shall become great. Without warning he shall destroy many. And I believe this is all future here. And he shall even rise up against the princes of princes. That should remind us of what happened in chapter 7. And he shall be broken, but not by human hand. The vision of the evenings and the mornings that has been told is true. Watch this, but seal up the vision. This is important because Daniel later is going to be told to seal up the vision. And so this is sealed up now for a certain period. When this is unveiled, I don't know. But I can suggest this, that people that have been writing on this for maybe 1,000 years or more may have been wrong. And some of them I think are wrong. Because it's been sealed up and it's going to be unveiled at some point. And we don't really know when that is. And Daniel, was overcome and lay sick for some days. Then we're going to jump to chapter 11, because this is specifically about Antiochus. And we're going to start getting into this type of the Antichrist. This is a man who lived. He was, I think, the 7th king or the 8th king in the Seleucus dynasty. In other words, from his great-great-great-great-grandfather to him, there were 7 kings. 7. And that's important to understand. But when we come to Antiochus, who is the primary picture of the Antichrist, and I believe has been given really too much of the picture of the Antichrist. He's been woven in with the Antichrist, with Daniel, I believe, and we need to understand that there's some certain things that are coming that we can understand that it actually pictures the Antichrist, and it's going to give us a different timeline in the tribulation. Antiochus' forces from him shall appear and profane the temple. So he's given the temple. And shall take away the burnt offering. So there's the regular burnt offering. They're able to have burnt offering, and then it's taken away. And they shall set up the abomination that makes desolate. So that was the promise to come for in chapter 7 earlier. That's the picture that is specifically given to the Antichrist. To Antiochus, and it happened just like it says, but it's going to happen again, just like it says, exactly like it says. There's no temple in Jerusalem right now. There has to be a temple because Daniel says it's going to be desecrated again. So there's a 3rd temple coming. And then when that gets set up, it's going to be, burnt offerings have to start at some point. And then he's going to come and he's going to do exactly like Antiochus did. He's going to stop the burnt offerings and he's going to desecrate the temple. And he's going to claim to be God. And shall take away the burnt offering. And they shall set up the abomination that makes desolate. He shall seduce with flattery those who violate the covenant. But the people who know their God shall stand firm and take action. This is the Maccabees, and it did happen. Remember, this whole section right here is specifically about Antiochus Epiphanes. Okay? And it all came true. But it goes back to chapter 8 and reveals the man there, Antiochus, and the Antichrist. And the wise among the people shall make many understand, though for some days they shall stumble by the sword and flame, by captivity and plunder. When they stumble, watch here though, it says for some days, not many, not a lot, but some. When they stumble, they shall receive a little help, and many shall join themselves to them with flattery, and some of the wise shall stumble, there it is again, so that they may be purified, refined, purified, and made white until the time of the end, for it still awaits the appointed time. Now you see what happens there? It switches now, I believe, into even a further distance of talking about the saints and what is to come in history for even into the tribulation. That's a picture of the tribulation that the saints are going to have to endure. Now, watch what happens. This is history. This is what happened. In 311 to 309, Seleucus ruled the entire eastern part of Alexander's empire. The most extensive in Asia after that of Alexander. Seleucus's wife was Persian. He ruled as far as the Indus River, which is the Pakistani border. Now you remember, we've showed you this map before, but this is the extent, the entire extent of Seleucus' empire. The capital, Seleucia, was built on the Tigris River. In 275 BC, the son of Seleucus moved all of Babylon's population to Seleucia, the capital. And remember, 7 kings ruled. So Alexander died, the kingdom got split up into 4, and this empire was ruled by 7 kings before Antiochus IV. Okay? Now I don't know if you can see that right there, that portion right there. There's a yellow, kind of a elongated shape there, and it's surrounded by purple. Can you see that a little bit? It makes it look like the purple goes up and the yellow comes down, and it did. Because Ptolemy, which is down here, and the Seleucus, they fought over this land forever. Ptolemy owned it, most of it. Okay? Ptolemy owned most of it for that time. Now remember what the prophecy says. The prophecy says that he will grow great. He will extend to the south and the east and to the beautiful land. Right? That's what the promise for the Antichrist was. Okay? But did Antiochus Epiphanes conquer that? And just everybody say no. Because his dad did. He didn't take the beautiful land. Antiochus Epiphanes did not take Israel proper, and he did not take Jerusalem. It was given to him. John MacArthur himself says this. Antiochus the third, the father of Antiochus Epiphanes. Antiochus the fourth is a picture of the Antichrist. The father conquered Israel and inherited the title King of Israel. But Daniel says he will grow great. The little horn will grow great and take over the beautiful land. It was already taken over. In fact, almost the whole empire was taken over by the time Antiochus got the title. So the Antichrist would start out, this is what MacArthur says, the Antichrist would start out and grow very powerful, but you must keep a distinction for this reason. The little horn in chapter 7 comes out of the Roman Empire, and the little horn in chapter 8 comes out of the Greek. And so they are to be kept distinct. One is the Antichrist, and the other one prefigures the Antichrist. And this is what I'm saying. The one in chapter 7 is the Antichrist, and the one in chapter 8 has to be both Antiochus and the Antichrist, because Antiochus never took the glorious land. He never took it. And there's another problem as well. I just want to remind you of the Roman Empire. And this is very interesting as well. This is what they call the western leg, and this is the eastern leg. You remember that they had the problem with the popes, and they were moving around in the west, and so they split the popes up, and the kings were fighting to be blessed by certain popes and all this other stuff. This is where I wish I had Joe up here. He could help me with the history of this a lot better than I can. But they moved did the Byzantines move Constantinople?
Constantine moved the capital.
Constantine, yeah. Constantine moved the capital of the eastern leg to Constantinople. He changed the name to Constantinople. It's Istanbul now. What was it before? Yeah. It's Istanbul now, but it was Constantinople, and it was named by Constantine, who announced himself to be king, and was at odds with the West. And then if the eastern leg lasted how many hundred years more?
Almost 1,000. It goes up to like 1400 AD.
Yeah, I think it lasted some 1,000 years. After this died out, this is the rest of the Roman Empire. The green there, the eastern leg, lasted a lot longer than the West did. So when somebody says they have to come out of the Roman Empire, well, what exactly does that mean? Where in the Roman Empire? And so, watch what happens here. Remember, Micah chapter 5 calls him the what? The Assyrian. Now, I've asked several Bible professors, prophecy professors, book writers to answer this question, and nobody's given me a good one. Why is he called the Assyrian? Does he come into Assyria? Is he from Assyria? Who is this man? Does he start there? Does he go there? Is he given that land? What happened? See, Antiochus IV is the best picture of the Antichrist. And he only went over here, if I remember right, he only went over here to beg for his dad's or his brother's life or something like that. He was at odds with the Romans. And in fact, the Romans are going to overcome him when he's down here in Egypt and say, you get out of here or you're going to die. It's funny because the story is Antiochus is standing in Egypt, and an emissary comes from Rome and comes up to him and says, you need to march and go back home. And Antiochus has said, I need some time to think about it. And the guy drew a circle around Antiochus and said, before you step out of this circle, you will tell me what you will do. And so he went back to Jerusalem in a rage. Watch what happens. This is out of 2 Maccabees, which is very good history. Antiochus IV was sent away from Egypt by the Romans. Raging like a wild animal, he set out from Egypt and took Jerusalem by storm. He was angry. He also heard that there was something going on in Jerusalem, so he left. This is on a specific day. They know the date that he did this, and this is important. He ordered his soldiers to cut down without mercy those whom they met and to slay those who took refuge in their houses. There was a massacre of young and old, a killing of women and children, a slaughtering of virgins and infants. In the space of 3 days, 80,000 were lost, 40,000 meeting a violent death, and the same number being sold into slavery. When did this happen? In December 168 BC, near Alexandria, which is northern Egypt there, a Roman envoy, this is what MacArthur says, a Roman envoy met him and told him that he must at once withdraw from Egypt and Cyprus. In the spirit of the revenge, he organized an expedition against Jerusalem, which he subdued, putting vast multitudes of its inhabitants to death in a most cruel manner. From this time, the Jews began the War of Independence under their Maccabean leaders with success. They defeated the armies of Antiochus that were sent against them. Now, how long did this rage happen? It happened for 740 days. Antiochus died in 164. The Jews celebrate Hanukkah, the Feast of Dedication, out of John chapter 20 or something like that. 10, you're right, you're 10. John chapter 10. See, this is my Bible encyclopedia over here. The Jews celebrate Hanukkah around Christmas because the sanctuary was cleansed on December 25th. Remember what Daniel said, to the cleansing of the temple. The burnt offerings have to start, the abomination of desolation, and then the cleansing of the temple. It ended on December 25th at 165. The transgression was from December 168 to December 165. Remember your BC, you're counting backwards. How many years is that? 3. 740 days. 2,300 days, Daniel said. 6 years, 110 days would back it up to September 6th, 171. What happened on December? Remember, Daniel is to the day. Remember when Messiah came into the city of Jerusalem, it was to the very day of the decree. So 2,360 days backs it up to 171. Now watch what MacArthur says. We do know when the closing of the 2,300 days came, because it says the closing will be the sanctuary cleansed. However, now September 6th, 171. You see, if you backed it up, it'd have to be September 6th, 171. We don't have any record of what happened on that day. But I'll tell you one thing, something did happen because God knows his numbers. You see what happened there? That does not work for me. What this tells me is the 2,300 days is unfulfilled. It's in the future. Because, and I think it falls in with Daniel's 70th week. And I'll show you how. Key, the 2,300 days remains unfulfilled. Daniel may actually be giving us 3 time frames. He already gave us 2 that we can trust. Why not give us 1 more? 70 weeks, and within the 70 weeks is the 69 weeks and the 1 week, and I'm suggesting the 2,300 days. And watch, this is very interesting. It's possible, and I'm not going to be dogmatic about this, because there's not a lot of people talking about it, and when not a lot of people talk about it, you got to be careful. So I don't want to be, but it doesn't make sense when somebody says we don't know what happened. Because they know what happened on every other day. They know what happened in history. What is going on here? And this makes a lot of sense, and I think it's wonderful to watch. It's possible that the 220 days into that 220 days into the 70th week, when the 70th week starts, 220 days into the 70th week, the sacrifices will start again. And note, the preeminent rabbi, who's the head of, or one of the heads, of trying to get everything going in Jerusalem, says it's going to take 1.5, 2 years max to build the temple. So, we go into our 70th week. We have, there's the 69 in the past that Daniel talked about. There's the cross. Messiah is cut off. And then at some point, the temple is going to be built. And let's say it took 1.5 years, maybe 2 years, but let's say 1.5 years, okay? So that puts it outside the 7 years. That puts it outside, see, 200 days, so you're talking well another 200 or 300 days. You're talking almost a year on this side of the tribulation when the covenant is started with the Antichrist. That starts the tribulation. That's clear. Daniel 9:27, 26, 27. He will start the covenant and then he's going to break it, of course, right in the middle. Right in the middle. But I think that he's given us another time frame. And in 220 days into the tribulation, the actual burnt offerings are going to start. And then they're going to have about a year, almost 2 years, I guess. Almost 2 years. Let's see. Yeah, about almost 2 years, I guess. A little under 2 years, where the Antichrist is going to stop. He's going to come in and do the abomination of desolation, just like Antiochus says. Now, why is that interesting? Because I believe, like the rabbi said, that temple has to start before the tribulation does. And that lines up with the rest of the Bible. It actually lines up with Daniel. It lines up with Revelation. And we've already seen evidence of this happening. They've got everything ready. They've got the cornerstone ready. All they need is the go-ahead to start the temple. And you and I, when we see these things, this is what Jesus is saying. When we see these things happening, we can be excited about what God is doing in his time frame. All right? Make sense? Now I'm going to suggest one more thing. Hanukkah. Hanukkah is called the Feast of Dedication. And sometimes we think, well, that's just something that the Maccabees did, and it doesn't mean anything. But we know that this is This is what I was thinking about. Jesus went up to the Feast of Dedication. He went up and celebrated it with them. And so I think it means something. And we'll see. I'm just going to go this far. I did some fun calculations. And I just went out like 30 years or something. And I look at Hanukkahs and I just back them up, just for fun. And it might be something you want to look at. It's interesting. But we know that he's going to finish the Feast of Atonement, Yom Kippur. He's going to finish Sukkot, the Feast of Tabernacles, and those kinds of things. And so I believe that everything means something. The regular burnt offerings have to start again, which they're not happening now. Then the abomination of desolation will take place, and the sanctuary will be given over to him to trample, and then it's going to be cleansed again. So that's what I believe chapter 7 in particular is giving us a picture of. Okay? Any questions there before I move on? All right. And then, if you jump over to chapter 11 of Daniel, it says briefly this, and the king shall do as he wills. He's going to do what he wants. Revelation 13, I saw a beast rising out of the sea with 10 horns. At the time of the end, the king of the south shall attack him. This is out of Daniel. But the king of the north shall rush upon him like a whirlwind, with chariots and horsemen, and with many ships. And he shall come into the countries, and shall overflow and pass through. He shall come into the glorious land. There's another picture of the Antichrist coming into this is the Antichrist coming into the glorious land. And tens of thousands shall fall, but these shall be delivered out of his hand. Edom and Moab and the majority of Ammon. He shall stretch out his hand against the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape. He shall become ruler of the treasures of gold and of silver, and all the precious things of Egypt, and the Libyans and the Cushites shall follow in his train. That's all of North Africa, basically. But news from the east and the north shall alarm him, and he shall go out with great fury to destroy and devote many to destruction. And he shall pitch his palatial tents between the sea and the glorious holy mountain, yet he shall come to his end with none to help. Now here's a picture of Israel. Here's the Sinai Peninsula. There's the Dead Sea. Jerusalem is the blue star. And right about where the red star is where the Antichrist will set his palatial tents. Now I always heard that when he's in Egypt, just like Antiochus was, when he's in Egypt, he hears news from the northeast, from the glorious land. And I've always heard that they hear that the Chinese are coming. That's what I've always heard. That the Chinese are bringing their 200 million troops. That may very well be, but there's one little problem with that. It says he shall come to his end. And the Chinese don't kill him. Who kills him? Jesus Christ. 2 Thessalonians 2:8. The lawless one, the Antichrist, will be revealed, from whom the Lord Jesus will kill with the breath of his mouth, and bring to nothing by the appearance of his coming. So that's his last stand. That's where he ends up, just like Antiochus Epiphanes, and he dies there by Jesus Christ's hand or his breath himself. Okay? Psalm 2. Why is this going to happen? Just like this. Why do the nations rage and the peoples plot in vain? The kings of the earth set themselves, and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and against his anointed, saying, let us burst their bonds apart and cast away their cords from us. Ask of me, and I will make the nations your heritage and the ends of the earth your possession. You shall break them with a rod of iron and dash them in pieces like a potter's vessel. He's going to finish what King David, the warrior king, could not or would not finish. Okay? He's going to complete it. There's a picture of the final battle. I believe, coming in Isaiah chapter 7. And this is interesting as well, because if you remember right, going way back now, that when we were going through First Chronicles, we were talking about David and some of his last battles. And it had to do with the same people, the Syrians, and then up to the river, the Euphrates. And so it's the same general area and the same people. So here's a king in Isaiah chapter 7. In the days of Ahaz, the son of Jotham, son of Uzziah, king of Judah, Rezin, the king of Syria, and Pekah, the son of Ramaliah, the king of Israel, came up to Jerusalem. So the northern kings have sided with the king of Ephraim, or king of Israel, and they're going to wage war on Judah. Okay, that's what's happening here. When the house of David, that's Judah, was told Syria is in league with Ephraim, the heart of Ahaz, he's now the king of Israel. Okay, now watch this. He's now sitting in the throne of David. He now has all the power that God would give him. He has everything that he needs against his enemies. But will you remember what happens? The heart of Ahaz and the heart of his people shook as the trees of the forest shake before the wind. He's not acting like David. And the Lord said to Isaiah, go out to meet Ahaz, you and Yahab, your son, and at the end of the conduit of the upper pool on the highway to the washer's field. And say to him, be careful, be quiet, do not fear, and do not let your heart be faint, because of two smoldering stumps of firebrands. By the way, I want to back up here for a second. Look what they end up here. They end up on a highway to the washer's field. And later on, you're going to see that there are women in his presence when this is happening. When he's talking about this prophecy, there's a woman there, and I believe that Isaiah just points to this woman who's in the washer's field and says, by the time this woman has a child, okay? I think it's happening literally right in front of them. And say to him, be careful, be quiet, do not fear, and do not let your heart be faint, because of those two smoldering stumps of firebrands at the fierce anger of Rezin and Syria and the son of Ramaliah. Because Syria with Ephraim and the son of Ramaliah has devised evil against you, saying, let us go up against Judah and terrify it, and let us conquer it for ourselves, and let us set up the son of Tabeel as king in its midst of it. Thus says the Lord, it shall not stand, and it shall not come to pass. For the head of Syria is Damascus, and the head of Damascus is Rezin, and within 65 years Ephraim will be shattered from being a people, and the head of Ephraim is Samaria, and the head of Samaria is the son of Ramaliah. If you are not firm in your faith, you will not be firm at all. He's telling him basically the same thing that he told Habakkuk, and he tells us in Romans, the just shall live by faith. Endure this, whatever is coming. And again, the Lord spoke to Ahaz. Here it is. This is this wonderful picture of the virgin child. Now, the word virgin or could mean young woman in the Old Testament in Hebrew. And I believe that there's a young woman there who's pregnant. And in fact, they're going to name the child. So there's a young woman, and it's a literal picture and a sign in front of them. By the time this child is weaned, something's going to happen. And yet, it's future as well, because remember what Matthew says. Ask a sign of your Lord your God. Let it be as deep as Sheol or as high as heaven. But Ahaz said, I will not ask, and I will not put to the Lord to the test. And he said, hear then, O Israel, or house of David, I said, it is too little for you to weary men, that you weary my God also. Therefore the Lord himself will give you a sign. Behold, the virgin shall conceive and bear a woman, and shall call his name Emmanuel. He shall eat curds and honey when he knows how to refuse the evil and choose the good. For before the boy knows how to refuse the evil and choose the good, the land whose two kings you dread will be deserted. So you see what's happening here? He's talking about the Messiah to come, but he's also talking about the two kings that they're dreading there. I also believe in David's time, the king of Mesopotamia and Syria and others were in league against David. The same exact thing was happening, and I believe the same exact thing is going to happen in Jesus when Jesus Christ comes. Jesus Christ is going to come and do what they could not or would not do. The exact same thing is going to happen in the exact same area, just like Antiochus Epiphanes. The Lord will bring up upon you and upon your people and upon your father's house such days as has not come since that day that Ephraim departed from Judah, the king of Assyria. There it is. The picture, the typology of the king of Assyria, who's named the Assyrian later. In that day the Lord will whistle for the fly that is at the end of the streams of Egypt, and for the bee that is in the land of Assyria, and they will all come and settle in the steep ravines, and in the clefts of the rock, and on all the north, the thorn bushes, and all the pastures. In that day the Lord will shave with a razor that is hired beyond the river with the king of Assyria. And then I'll just finish with this. In chapter 9, this whole picture evolves into a literal picture of Jesus Christ coming. Another Christmas story, by the way. For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulders, and his name shall be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Of the increase of his government and of peace there will be no end, on the throne of David and over all his kingdom, to establish it and to uphold it with justice and righteousness from this time forth and forevermore. The zeal of the Lord of hosts will do this. We started talking about David's throne and how he was the warrior king, and then the king of peace was his son. And now we're back to the warrior king, who's a picture, who actually is Jesus Christ, and is going to finish what David started and what Ahaz would not, out of rebellion, do. He was that picture of the king's son. He had the ability to come into the king's throne and ask for anything he wanted. And truly, that's where you're at now. You have that opportunity, you have the ability to come to the Father, and Jesus said, ask what you will, and it will be done unto you. And so you have that authority and that pleasure to come into your Father's throne and pray. Next week, we're going to start right here. We're going to talk about the Psalm 83 war and how this fits into this. Are there any questions or anything we want to discuss first? Nothing? Everything's clear as a bell, right? All right. Remember, it's not important to get all the details. It's important to see that these things are going through the Old Testament, and there's a picture of Christ fulfilling his plan only to the point where he says, all these things spoke of me. Remember what he said to the two on the road to Emmaus and others? These things all spoke of me, and he's going to fulfill every jot and tittle. Let's pray. Lord, thank you so much for your grace and mercy. We look forward to your coming. Help us understand these things, Lord, and get a picture of what is to come. We want to see your hand in these things, Lord, and give us courage that we may talk to those who have no hope. But first, encourage us, and we know that you will. Let us have the words to encourage others, and we pray that we will. And we'll do this in your holy name. Amen.